Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, The Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
It's Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran, on with Dr. Christian Kopff on this Thanksgiving Day, November 27, 2014. Dr. Kopff, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be talking to you.
Not to start off on a negative on this Thanksgiving holiday, but any thoughts on Ferguson and the aftermath?
Well, I don't have anything to say other people haven't said. They took months looking over the evidence. They listened to 60 witnesses. We know that there were different testimony. They came up with a decision which is just on the purely legal basis, if there are contradictory witnesses, and a jury must begin with the presumption of innocence for a person on trial, which can only be overturned when there's no reasonable doubt. Even on the minimal level, contradictory witnesses mean there is reasonable doubt. So there was no legal basis to go ahead. The fact is, however, that there were many of the witnesses against the officer, at least one especially of the witnesses against the officer, was a person involved in robbing a convenience store with the victim just before the event. His testimony is hard to take wonderfully seriously, and there were several witnesses, but especially witness number 10, who confirmed the officer's account in detail. So I think the grand jury had no choice but to return no true bill of indictment, because there could not have been a conviction when there were witnesses that were so contradictory to one another.
One thing that's come out of this about the aftermath is the question, was the National Guard, were they ordered to stand down by someone in Washington? The mayor of Ferguson appeared on a Missouri radio station, and here's what he said.
Unfortunately, I know I've been on the phone in contact with the county executive's office. I know he has requested, have requested the National Guard troops to come out.
And this, of course, I should say, is after the grand jury decision came down.
From the command post to help restore order along the business district. We have not seen that. It's my understanding that the commanders out on the streets have requested this, and those calls have gone unheeded at this point.
They're talking about the National Guard. Well, Peter Kinder, the lieutenant governor in Missouri, he goes even farther. This is Peter Kinder, the lieutenant governor, appearing on Fox News Channel TV.
And here's my question that the governor must answer. Is the reason that the National Guard was not in there because the Obama administration and the Holder Justice Department leaned on you to keep them out? I cannot imagine any other reason why the governor who mobilized the National Guard would not have them in there to stop this.
So some speculation going on all over, both on the internet and on Fox News. On various blog pages and on Fox News, speculation that someone in Washington ordered the National Guard to stand down. Your thoughts there, Dr. Kopff?
Well, one has to say it was at best a monumental misjudgment to have the National Guard guarding downtown St. Louis instead of Ferguson. And the difference between their absence and presence was the night the verdict was announced, there was massive rioting, destruction of property, and 61 arrests. And the next day, when the National Guard were sent to Ferguson, there was, some stones thrown and a few shots fired off, but basically there was relative peace. I mean, the idea that, armed people don't discourage rioting is quite silly, and it's quite clear that it was at worst a monumental mistake. And the point that the lieutenant governor is bringing is, how could anyone who knew we needed the National Guard have made that mistake unless pressure was put on him to make the mistake?
It must be a very difficult situation for the people to live through in Ferguson. I was talking with a relative of mine who's friends with one of the police officers' wives out there, and they were absolutely horrified in a town called University City right next to Ferguson when, I guess, Anonymous, the hacking group, released the names of all the police officers in that area and their names and home addresses.
Yeah, it's a disgraceful thing to do. The fact is, Ferguson had been a pretty peaceful town and had gotten along fine. And so, obviously, the police were not ready for anything this extreme. They were used to dealing with, people breaking in and stealing a TV set or something, and then this happens, and they weren't ready for it because you're trained to do what you normally do. Had they been an urban police department, it might have been something else. I think people who blame them, and even Mr. O'Reilly has, and certainly the Attorney General has, I think are not taking into account that suburban police have a different job, equally important, but not as stressful. And it really is impressive if Officer Wilson's account of what he did, which is confirmed by some witnesses, including especially witness number 10, is true. He handled the situation as he had been trained to do, but he was not a trained urban policeman. He was a suburban policeman. And you're not really trained to handle this kind of activity when you're in the suburbs. And I think one has to take that into account, too. I think he did do what he was trained to do, but, you don't have the experience. It's one thing to be trained, another thing to actually have the experience in these things. He's still a man in his 20s, after all, himself.
One thing that was very unusual about this whole thing, and I don't know what organization brought these protesters in from out of town, but apparently a Fox affiliate out in Missouri reported that there were protesters who trained on how to rush into traffic and how to interfere with traffic and how to engage with crowds and the police and whatnot. Protesters were shipped in from outside of the Missouri area in order to, take part in the chaos and anarchy there.
Well, anyone who's studied what is euphemistically called civil disobedience, trained law-breaking to break down the rule of law, knows that these people practice. They read books. They're assigned reading Gandhi and Thoreau and the Reverend King, and they train. So yes, these people are trained. They are out there, and they're ready to be sent into areas where it's felt that disruptive activities will be beneficial to their political cause. And of course, one can't leave this without mentioning the name of Saul Alinsky, the patron saint of this kind of activity. These people, there's nothing spontaneous about what happened in Ferguson, despite the way the press presented it. The occasional bits of anger or frustration may be spontaneous, but the rioting that took place after the shooting and the rioting that took place the first day of the event was initiated, triggered by trained agitators who trained to do this anywhere where the chance arises.
Yeah, that's something else out there. We're talking on the Newsmaker Show today here on this Thanksgiving Thursday with Dr. Christian Kopff. Dr. Kopff, there was a new EPA rule, something about menu labeling you wanted to talk about?
Sure. Well, the new ruling that came down, officially it's actually a higher up. It's actually the Food and Drug Administration itself. I'm sorry that I gave the wrong initials. The Food and Drug Administration's Commissioner Margaret, whose name ironically is Margaret Hamburg. I mean, really, she ought to change her last name to Salad or something, I think. Has a new rule in which chain restaurants and some fast food that are chains and a few other kinds of restaurants will have to list the calories of everything there. She asserts that, quotes, Americans eat and drink about 1/3 of their calories away from home, and these rules will give consumers information when they're dining out. So you'll actually know how much calories are in the beer you're ordering. This should be great for Coors Light, I hope. The problem is, of course, calories is eating of calories is the main cause of weight. There's no question. The calories is the essential element here. The problem is these things always start out with, we're just giving you information. Then a little bit further down the line, when you don't listen to their information, then they become mandatory. Starbucks has already experimented with this because they serve not only this very good coffee, but a lot of other fancy drinks, all these mocha things, etc. So they started putting the calories up. What they found was, for a couple of weeks, people were ordering less caloric beverages. Then they just stopped caring, and their sales went back up again where they had been. And that's what's going to happen here. People are going to maybe look up and see what a Big Mac does and what a salad does and take a salad, but eventually a couple of weeks go by and you're going to say, gee, I'm hungry. I'm going to get a hamburger. And then the government will say, well, unfortunately, the people who have been analyzed so insightfully by Professor Jonathan Gruber of MIT clearly don't know what's good for them, and we are going to have to impose on them what we think is the right food. And this will be the next step, almost certainly, maybe delayed a little bit if Mrs. Clinton, by some unconceivable possibility, is not the next president. But it'll still happen eventually, because once you put these things in, once you intervene at this minuscule micromanaging level, the next stage is to make sure, first you give people information, then when they don't listen to you, you tell them what to do.
Do we know if this is coming from someone like First Lady Michelle Obama or former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg?
The poster girl for this is indeed Michelle Obama, but it is technically, again, it's like dealing with the governor of Missouri, right? It is technically coming from the commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, Margaret Hamburg. But yes, Mrs. Obama feels that her mission, and she, as we all know, is a very slim, svelte, healthy, athletic woman, her ambition is to make sure that Americans eat right, and of course especially children. But this is a place where one can really have an effect is on these fast food chains and other chain restaurants, where again they are national, and so the national government feels it can and ought to intervene. Yes, ultimately it goes back to Michelle Obama's initiative, because most people want health, most people want healthy kids, and obesity is something we can see as opposed to other health problems which are harder to see directly.
Just pulled something up on the Washington Post as we've been talking on this menu labeling. It says that foods purchased at drive-through windows are going to be menu labeled. How would they do that?
Well, see, we can all sit back and imagine how they're going to do these things.
Or some sort of food police coming up to you and reading you your rights on this stuff?
I'm glad to hear there will be a position for Officer Wilson. He won't be in Ferguson, but he can now be in charge of making sure that people read the drive-through window signs.
Dr. Christian Kopff on the Newsmaker Show here on AM 1480 WLEA. Back in just a moment, we'll talk about what we're thankful for here on this Thanksgiving holiday. Back on the Newsmaker Show here on this Thanksgiving. It's Thursday, November 27th. Dr. Kopff, any ideas of things to be thankful for today?
Well, let me say in general and then specifically, and in general, of course, we live in a beautiful country which is, there's still, compared to most of the world, a lot of freedom and the ability to bring up your kids still the way you want to. Whether we'll keep that, that's Benjamin Franklin's famous statement. What have you given us, Dr. Franklin? A republic if you can keep it. But we can still be grateful we've kept this republic for a long time. Even things that have threatened it, like the president's recent presidential order on stopping deportation on 5 million illegal immigrants, I thought the good news about that was that he quoted the Bible. He based it on the Bible. And that means that if conservatives ever get back into office again, we can start issuing presidential orders and make them based on the Bible.
There you go.
So I think it's such great news. You know, people are complaining. You know, Saturday Night Live did this hilarious sketch of him and his attitude toward the rule of law. But the good news is, if we ever get in office again, we can take our Bibles out and say, look, we're just following Barack Obama when we introduce the Bible into our political discourse. So I'm very thankful that the president quoted the Bible, because I think now we can start quoting the Bible too.
I would have to say I'm thankful that I've never been called for jury duty. I've always thought if I was, I would have to say I'm a reporter, and I'm going to have to report on this case, and I couldn't do it. Your thoughts of that as a likely story, Doc?
That's, yes, this is the sign that you're a well-educated American, that you've already planned out your strategy for getting out of jury duty.
There you go.
And that's the reason why you want kids to go to college, because this is one of the things they learn is how to get out of jury duty. Yeah, I was quite amazed. I understood the college professors were never chosen. because we sit there and we notice the evidence and we analyze it. And I do think the DA was crazy to put me on the jury. But my favorite one was one of the women wanted to get out of jury duty because if your work is too important to be interrupted for a week, then you could get out. And this woman explained that she worked for the University of Colorado's athletic department, and she wrote the checks that reimbursed the coaches when they went and visited high school kids to recruit them. And if she was put on this jury, they'd have to wait a week for their reimbursement checks. And I was very proud of the judge for not bursting into laughter.
Oh, boy.
What's the most valuable thing you do? What is something so indispensable you can't let someone out of jury duty for? Well, I reimburse coaches who fly around the country recruiting kids for the football team.
There you go.
This woman clearly, sincerely felt that her work was, if you put her off for a week, these guys would have to wait a week for their reimbursement. Oh, my goodness.
You talked a moment ago about learning things in college. One time a professor of mine in communications class was talking about myths on TV, and one of the myths that he mentioned was, he said, have you ever seen those scenes on TV or in movies where if a door is locked, somebody takes out like a credit card and unlocks the door with the credit card by putting it through? And you know what? I always believed him, and then I was working at a radio station out of town. This was in the early 2000s, and locked myself out of my office on a weekend, and one of the DJs came in, pulled out a credit card, and unlocked the door with it. Slipped it through the keyhole part, not the keyhole part, the other part of the lock.
Sure. So that's another thing. So you learned something mistaken in college.
Yes, it was a big error. I'm not going to sue the school, but yes, the teacher was wrong.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So there's a case where being a high school dropout taught them something important, how to use credit cards to break into locked doors. So I'm not sure for a real future in this country, you didn't make the wiser choice, but there you were. You could have been a burglar for years if you only believed the story about credit cards.
There you go. Dr. Christian Kopff, any final thoughts before we go?
Well, for teachers, but every once in a while, they're wrong.
Any final thoughts before we go, Dr. Kopff?
No, my final thought is to be grateful that you and I both live in beautiful parts of the country and that we get to enjoy that every day. And my memory of upstate New York is very beautiful, and believe me, Colorado is also very beautiful. We don't really consider the Adirondacks and the Catskills real mountains, of course, but still they're nice hills, and they're beautiful, and I think we should also be grateful for that, because there are many parts of the world that are not beautiful.
Alrighty, amen to that. Dr. Christian Kopff, thanks for joining us on this holiday.
It's great to be talking to you, and happy Thanksgiving to upstate New York.